October 1942, Stalingrad, on the western bank of the Volga River. The air is frozen, the ground is shattered, and the world's most brutal moment of the Second World War is unfolding. Germany has already taken nearly 80% of the city. Their tanks creep through the ruins, their infantry push deeper into the industrial districts, and their artillery pounds the riverbank without mercy. The Soviets have been driven back to the water. There is nowhere left to run. To Berlin, victory seems guaranteed. Radio reports say the same thing over and over.
Stalingrad will fall within hours.
The Luftwaffe drops another wave of bombs, so powerful that seismographs miles away record the impact. Everything points to one conclusion: Germany is about to crush the Soviet Union. But this is the moment where everything snaps. Underground, in a command post buried beneath the rubble of a collapsed apartment block, General Vasily Chuikov studies the chaotic reports pouring in from all directions. His scouts are panicking. The Germans are everywhere. We've lost the grain elevator. We can't tell our men apart from theirs. To anyone else, this sounds like total defeat. To Chuikov, it is something else, an opportunity born inside a nightmare. As he studies the map, something clicks. The Germans are close. Too close. And because they are too close, they are vulnerable. More vulnerable than they have ever been. Blitzkrieg is powerful only when there is distance. Tanks need space. Planes need separation. Artillery needs clear lines. Germany's entire war machine functions only when it can strike from far away. Here, in the ruins of Stalingrad, that distance has vanished. Chuikov gives the order that will change the fate of the Eastern Front. Close the distance. Do not let them stand more than 50 meters away. Hug them. Stay so close their planes can't bomb without hitting their own men. It is an order that sounds insane. It is an order no textbook ever taught. It is an order that will turn the city into hell for everyone trapped inside. But it works. It works instantly. The first chain reaction, the Luftwaffe goes blind. Pilots dive toward the city, ready to release their bombs, but beneath them, the Germans and Soviets are tangled together. One wrong drop will wipe out their own troops. The sky, Germany's greatest strength, becomes useless. The second chain reaction, the panzer divisions get trapped. Tanks meant for open fields now crawl through narrow corridors of twisted steel and broken concrete. Their turrets cannot turn. Their vision is blocked. Their armor becomes a coffin. Every doorway hides a soldier with a grenade or a rifle pointed directly at them. The third chain reaction, artillery becomes impossible. You cannot flatten a building when your own platoon is hiding inside the next room. You cannot shell a street when your men are fighting 2 walls away. Germany's overwhelming firepower evaporates. The fourth chain reaction, the battlefield shrinks into a nightmare. Engagement ranges collapse from kilometers to meters to breathing distance. Men fight with knives, with shovels, with sharpened scrap metal. Grenades bounce across floors like marbles in a haunted house. Snipers fire from holes small enough to fit a hand through. This is not modern warfare. This is prehistoric violence wearing 20th century uniforms. And then morale begins to fracture. For the first time, elite German units feel genuine fear, not of death, but of the invisible enemy crawling through the walls, through the smoke, through the wreckage. They write home, "We take a kitchen, but lose the bedroom. We take the hallway, but lose the basement. We gain meters, never victory." The German war machine is being dragged, inch by inch, into a battlefield where its strength does not matter. A battlefield defined by suffocation, by proximity, by terror. Meanwhile, Stalingrad itself begins to fight back. its rubble becomes fortresses, its collapsed buildings become traps, its ruined factories become mazes. Every pile of bricks hides a rifle. Every staircase can become a grave. The city is no longer a place. It is a predator made of dust and shadows, and the German Sixth Army is walking straight into its jaws. This is the twist that makes Stalingrad one of the most shocking events in military history. Germany did not lose when they were weak. They lost when they were at their strongest. They did not fall because the Soviets overpowered them. They fell because the Soviets changed the rules, dragging them into a world where power, technology, and speed meant nothing. A world measured not in kilometers, not in firepower, but in 50 meters. 50 meters that suffocated the most advanced army on Earth. 50 meters that turned tanks into prisoners and planes into decorations. 50 meters that broke Blitzkrieg's spine. And now the question becomes, how does the most feared offensive doctrine in the world collapse so completely? Why did its greatest strengths become fatal weaknesses inside a ruined city? And how did 50 meters become the knife that cut the German army open from the inside? To understand that, we need to examine the monster Germany brought to Stalingrad, Blitzkrieg, and why this one city forced it to die. To understand why 50 meters killed the German war machine, we have to understand the creature that Germany marched into Stalingrad. Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. The doctrine that redefined the rules of modern combat. It wasn't simply a tactic. It was a system, an ecosystem, a synchronized orchestra of speed, firepower, and shock. And for 3 years, no one in Europe knew how to stop it. Blitzkrieg was built on 3 pillars: mobility, coordination, and distance. First, mobility. German armored divisions moved faster than anyone thought possible. In Poland, they advanced up to 40 miles a day. In France, they shattered one of the strongest armies in the world in just 6 weeks. Their tanks weren't always the strongest, but they were always in the right place at the right time, punching holes exactly where the enemy was weakest. Second, coordination. Germany didn't just use tanks. They used tanks, infantry, artillery, and aircraft as one living organism. When the infantry found resistance, they didn't attack it head-on. They called the Luftwaffe. When an enemy line wavered, tanks rolled through the gap instantly. Communication was rapid, relentless, precise. No other army in the world had that level of synchronization in 1939, 1940, or even 1941. And third, distance. The most overlooked part of Blitzkrieg. Long-range awareness, long-range strikes, long-range maneuvering. Blitzkrieg is a doctrine of space. It requires lines of sight, open ground, and room to break through and circle around. Its core strength is overwhelming force, delivered from afar before the enemy can react. Everything about it, its radios, its bombing runs, its armored thrusts, depends on having a battlefield that stretches outward, not inward. And that is exactly why Stalingrad killed it. Stalingrad took this doctrine, this monster of open terrain, and locked it inside a cage made of concrete, steel, and rubble. Blitzkrieg is a cheetah. Stalingrad forced it into a sewer. Blitzkrieg is a hurricane. Stalingrad turned it into a closet. Blitzkrieg needed space to breathe. The city strangled it. The signs of failure appeared immediately. German tanks approached the city, expecting to slice through defenses like they always had. Instead, they were met with narrow streets, clogged with collapsed buildings, sunken roofs, overturned trams, cratered ground, and mountains of debris. Tanks couldn't maneuver, they couldn't turn, They couldn't gain speed. Their armor became useless when every Soviet soldier was positioned above them, below them, behind them, and beside them. And without tanks leading the assault, the entire sequence of Blitzkrieg collapsed. The Luftwaffe tried to compensate, but Stalingrad's ruins created a second death blow. Line of sight disappeared. From the air, the city was a maze of shadows and dust clouds. German pilots couldn't identify Soviet positions. They couldn't tell their own troops apart from enemy troops. They couldn't risk bombing the very streets their infantry were fighting on. The closer the Germans got to the Volga, the smaller the battlefield became, and the more useless their air force grew. Artillery faced the same fate. The German command wanted to flatten Soviet strongpoints, but their own frontline units were now entangled with Soviet defenders at distances so close that a single misplaced shell could wipe out an entire platoon of their own men. The Germans had the guns, the ammunition, the logistics, but none of it mattered. Their greatest weapon became too dangerous to use. Blitzkrieg simply wasn't designed for a world where the enemy is 10 meters away behind a broken wall. The German generals quickly realized the catastrophe unfolding beneath them. The Sixth Army had the numbers, the equipment, the discipline, but it was fighting in an environment designed perfectly to nullify all of those advantages. Buildings became fortresses, factories became battlegrounds, staircases became ambush sites, rooms turned into kill zones measured in inches. Every advance took hours. Every 100 feet cost dozens of lives. The Germans had superior long-range firepower. The Soviets removed long range from the equation. The Germans relied on speed. The Soviets removed speed from the battlefield. The Germans depended on clean lines of attack. The Soviets shattered those lines into thousands of jagged pieces. In open terrain, Blitzkrieg was unstoppable. In Stalingrad, it was irrelevant. And while German strength vanished, Soviet strength slowly multiplied. Reinforcements crossed the Volga at night, hidden by darkness, smoke, and snow. Men ferried across on barges, knowing many would never reach the opposite shore. But every man that did cross added one more shadow to the labyrinth. One more rifle barrel hidden behind a collapsed beam. One more pair of eyes waiting in the rubble. Every night, Chuikov's army grew stronger. Every day, the Germans grew weaker, trapped in a battlefield that strangled their doctrine like a noose slowly tightening around their necks. German commanders begged for more air support. They begged for more tanks. They begged for reinforcements. But none of it mattered. Stalingrad was not a battle of weapons. It was a battle of environment, a battle of terrain, a battle of distance, or rather, the complete erasure of distance. 50 meters. That was the death zone. Too close for bombers, too close for artillery, too close for maneuver warfare, too close for radio coordination, too close for Blitzkrieg to function. And once Blitzkrieg stopped functioning, Germany lost the only advantage that had carried it across Europe. The German Sixth Army didn't realize it yet, but the moment they were forced into 50-meter combat, they were already defeated. They were fighting not just Soviet soldiers. They were fighting a city designed to consume them, a doctrine designed to betray them, a commander who weaponized desperation better than anyone imagined. Blitzkrieg did not die at the hands of a stronger army. It died the moment the battlefield collapsed to 50 meters. In that narrow gap, the German war machine, once the strongest in the world, simply couldn't breathe. And soon, it would suffocate completely. Once Blitzkrieg died in the ruins of Stalingrad, something far worse began to happen. The German Sixth Army didn't just lose its weapons or its speed, it began to lose its mind. The battle turned into a psychological torture chamber where every street, every sound, every shadow became an enemy. The Germans came to Stalingrad expecting war, What they found instead was something closer to a haunted house built on top of a mass grave. The city wasn't dead, it was alive. It breathed through the cracks of ruined factories. It watched them from shattered windows. It stalked them at night through basements and sewer tunnels. And every night, Stalingrad belonged to the Soviets. When darkness fell, the Sixth Army felt the terror rising. They knew what was coming. They could hear it before they saw it. The faint scrape of boots across broken glass, the soft clatter of rubble under a moving body, the muffled whisper of Russian voices navigating the ruins like they were born inside them. The Soviets used the night like a weapon. They slipped through holes in walls, climbed over twisted beams, crawled beneath floors, appeared behind German lines as if the city itself opened a door for them. The Germans tried to rest, but rest was impossible. Sleep became a luxury denied to them. Men fell asleep with rifles in their hands, only to wake up screaming because they thought someone was standing over them in the dark. Tension wrapped around every soldier's throat like a rope. One German wrote home, "We don't fear death, we fear the night." Meanwhile, Soviet soldiers, hungry, exhausted, half-frozen, moved with a sense of purpose that defied logic. They navigated the ruins with animal instinct. They knew every broken staircase, every crawl space, every collapsed ceiling. They attacked silently, disappeared instantly, and reappeared hours later in a different position. To the Germans, it was as though the Soviets were multiplying. In truth, they weren't multiplying. The Germans were simply shrinking, physically, mentally, spiritually. They were surrounded, even when they weren't. They were hunted, even when no one was there. Rations began to run thin. Ammunition that once seemed endless now had to be counted like gold. Winter settled over the ruins like a death shroud. Temperatures plunged so low that rifles froze, boots stiffened, and breath hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. The cold crushed German morale more effectively than any Soviet bullet. But the worst weapon the Soviets wielded wasn't ice, or hunger, or grenades. It was the city itself, a labyrinth that rewarded one side and punished the other. Stalingrad was built for workers, not soldiers. Every factory was a fortress. Every pipeline was a tunnel. Every apartment block was a layered stronghold with snipers on the roof, machine gunners on the second floor, riflemen on the first, and assault troops hidden in the basement. Germans discovered this the hard way. They would take the upper floors of a building only to realize Soviet soldiers were still in the basement beneath them. They would capture a street, but the houses on both sides still held Soviet machine gun nests. They would break through a wall, only to find a Soviet soldier waiting with a Molotov cocktail in hand. Progress was measured not in kilometers, but in rooms. Rooms the Germans could never truly hold. If they captured a position during the day, the Soviets often took it back at night. This constant back and forth shredded German nerves. They were fighting a war with no front line, no safety zone, no rear area. Every inch of the city wanted to kill them. And then came the cold realization that haunted the Sixth Army. They were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. Every step into the ruins tightened a noose they couldn't see. Every advance forward sealed off their escape route. Every building they took cost them more men than they could replace. The Soviets fought with desperation. The Germans fought with fatigue. The Soviets fought on home soil. The Germans fought on borrowed time. The Soviets brought reinforcements across the Volga every night, under artillery fire and freezing wind. The Germans received nothing. No reinforcements, no replacements, no rest. Their supply lines stretched thinner than ice on a winter puddle, and eventually they snapped. Men began to starve. Frostbite chewed through skin. Ammunition ran so low that soldiers rationed bullets like food. German medical stations became morgues, bodies piled up outside buildings because the ground was too frozen to bury them. And still, every night the Soviets closed the distance again. The German soldiers began to understand the truth, a truth that their commanders refused to admit. There was no victory coming, no breakthrough, no relief. They were sinking deeper into a battlefield that devoured everything put into it. The Soviet strategy was not to push them out of the city, it was to let them rot inside it. Stalingrad was not just a fight, it was a slow, methodical strangulation, a deliberate, calculated suffocation of an army that once terrified the world. And soon, the trap would close completely. Because while the Germans were dying inch by inch in the city, the Soviets were preparing something far larger, far deadlier, and far more devastating than anything the Germans had seen yet. A storm was building on the horizon, a storm called Operation Uranus. The storm that would kill the German Sixth Army did not begin inside Stalingrad. It began far outside the city, where the German lines were weakest. The Soviets knew the Germans had poured everything into the urban meat grinder. Their elite divisions were bleeding inside the ruins, while their flanks, held by under-equipped Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian units, were stretched thin across open steppe. This is where the Soviets struck. On November 19th, 1942, the earth shook as thousands of Soviet guns fired at once. The sky turned red. The steppe lit up like a burning horizon. Soviet tanks rolled forward in massive columns, smashing through frozen fields and tearing through Axis lines that collapsed almost instantly. Entire divisions broke apart in hours. Soldiers abandoned their trenches. Some ran. Some froze. Some simply vanished under the treads of T-34s. Operation Uranus was not designed to break the Germans in Stalingrad. It was designed to surround them. And it worked. Within days, two massive Soviet pincers, one from the north, one from the south, closed around the city like a jawbone snapping shut. Roads were cut, escape routes severed, supply lines destroyed. The Sixth Army, over 300,000 men strong, was trapped in a pocket of ruins barely large enough to stand in. At first, the German High Command refused to understand the magnitude of the disaster. Hitler reassured Paulus, the commander of the Sixth Army, that the Luftwaffe would supply his troops by air. Hitler promised this pocket, this Festung Stalingrad, would hold. It would survive. It would fight until relief arrived. It was a lie, a fatal lie. To sustain the Sixth Army, the Luftwaffe needed to deliver over 700 tons of supplies per day. They barely managed 100. On some days, they delivered nothing. Pilots flew through blizzards, fog, and Soviet anti-aircraft fire, only to drop crates into the wrong areas, or worse, into Soviet hands. Inside the encircled city, conditions collapsed instantly. Food disappeared. Soldiers received a few ounces of bread per day. Some chewed on frozen horse meat. Others boiled leather belts for calories. Frostbite spread like infection. Ammunition dwindled to single bullets. Medical supplies ran out. Wounded men lay in unheated basements, stacked next to each other like firewood, whispering prayers that froze in the air. And still, Hitler refused to let them break out. "The Sixth Army will stand fast," he declared, "not a step back." He ordered Paulus to hold the city no matter the cost. But the cost was everything. Every soldier, every rifle, every last heartbeat inside the pocket. The Soviets continued to tighten the noose. They captured airfields, forcing supply planes to land miles away or not at all. They cut through German defenses, building by building. slowly crushing the pocket until it shrank to a fraction of its size. Christmas arrived, but there was nothing to celebrate. German soldiers burned furniture for heat. They carved holes in ice to drink dirty water. Some froze to death in their sleep. Others froze while standing guard, rifles frozen to their hands. The temperature dropped so low that engines cracked and fuel turned to sludge. And then came January. The Sixth Army was no longer a fighting force. It was a mass of starving, dying men waiting for the inevitable. They held the ruins not out of strength, but because they had nowhere else to go. Soviet loudspeakers broadcast messages in German. "Paulus, surrender! Your men are doomed!" Most soldiers didn't need convincing. They already knew. By late January 1943, the Sixth Army had split into two isolated pockets, each struggling to survive inside a wasteland of snow, bones, and burnt-out vehicles. The Soviets advanced relentlessly. German officers radioed Berlin. "We are collapsing. We are starving. We cannot move." There was only silence in return. On January 31st, Soviet troops surrounded Paulus's final headquarters, the basement of a department store. Surrounded, freezing, and out of options, Paulus surrendered. He became the first German field marshal in history to be captured alive. 2 days later, the northern pocket fell. What remained of the Sixth Army, once a proud, unstoppable force of over 300,000 men, had been reduced to a fraction of that number. Tens of thousands died from hunger, disease, or exposure. Tens of thousands more marched into Soviet captivity, where most would never return. Stalingrad was over, but its meaning was only beginning. The defeat shattered the myth of German invincibility. It marked the moment the world realized Hitler could be beaten. It marked the moment the Eastern Front shifted permanently against Germany. And it marked the moment the Soviet Union rose from the brink of destruction to begin the long march westward, toward Berlin, toward victory. But what killed the Sixth Army was not just encirclement, not just hunger, not just winter. What killed them began months earlier, when the battlefield collapsed to 50 meters. When Blitzkrieg, the weapon that conquered Europe, suffocated inside a maze of broken walls. Stalingrad proved something brutal and timeless. Power means nothing if it is used in the wrong environment. Technology fails when space disappears. Strategy dies when the battlefield changes shape. The Germans didn't lose because they were weak. They lost because they were fighting a war designed for speed inside a city built for traps. 50 meters. That was the beginning of their end. And when the last shots faded, when the last soldiers fell silent, and when the Volga wind swept through the ruins, one truth remained standing among the ashes. In Stalingrad, the strongest army in the world didn't just lose a battle. It lost the war.